Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Connecting VTCAP and Local Common Assessment Systems webinar. We're happy to have you all with us today. We had quite a number of people sign up, and this webinar will be posted on our Vermont resource site. All right, so rest assured, if you didn't make it, there will be another opportunity. This is down below at the bottom where you see Vermont data use and that link with the square and the arrow. That means that that's a live link. Everyone that registered is going to get a copy of the slide deck. So you'll be able to use that link if you need to go to the resources that have been accrued over probably the entire year of this initiative. We have this wonderful initiative that is coming to a close potentially coming to a close at the end of this month, and we've done great work. It's been wonderful. And this is a summary of what the intent of it and when some different things were happening. I am very happy to be here today with George and Marissa. I am the Professional Development Director at Demonstrated Success, and we are a company that is based in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, that was hired to conduct this benchmark assessment initiative over the course of this year and all of the training and school site work. And Marissa's here. Wave, Marissa.
Hi, everyone.
And Marissa, she works a lot with math and data, and she has her master's in curriculum instruction, and she focuses in data analysis and math for our team. And George is a leadership coach, a digital learning specialist. He was a middle school teacher 100 years ago, and he has been working with us and meeting all of you out there in Vermont, and it's been terrific. So thanks, George. Oh, and the American Sign Language. You need that.
It wasn't slide right
All right. I want to also just note that Danielle Dupuis will be here for a bit. She's the Director of Assessment and Accountability, and I want to thank her for her help. And we have a guest, Catherine Rossman, who is the Education Programs Coordinator for Science. She's going to be presenting some science slides. After our first iteration of this webinar, I was lucky to meet Catherine at one of the workshops, and we talked, and we both agreed that science needed a little more presence in this session. So that'll happen later. I want to encourage anyone and everyone who's here with us to consider attending our two final events for this year's contract. On the 25th and the 26th, we'll be at Lake Maury, and we will be having the Assessment Literacy Conference. And on the 30th, we will be having, also at Lake Maury, our Professional Learning Communities Day. So maybe we'll see some of you. You can still sign up. Just some logistics. Everyone is muted. There's a lot of people on the call, or at least there were a lot of people registered. So we decided to go with a webinar format. And you can ask all your questions. We encourage you to, please, please. You can write them into the chat or the Q&A, or you can raise your hand. George will be our navigator of all that. So he will be looking for questions and hands and reactions and all of the above, and he will bring you in accordingly. Again, the session will be recorded and posted on the Vermont resource site. And at the very end, there will be a brief survey that will pop up. Okay. So there's a few things that we'll accomplish today. The first, very quickly, we're going to just review how to think about and interpret the results of the VTCAP. And then after that, we are going to spend some time looking at VTCAP items we used the sample items, and how we're going to consider how they're the same and how they're different in language, format, and approach to what we do daily in our local instructional materials and assessment. And we're going to reflect a little bit about how we might be able to develop instructional materials that'll be integrated throughout, that more reflect the types of items, the Common Core aligned items and experiences that students are having on our state assessment. going to zoom right in. So I'm hoping everyone on the call knows that the VTCAP assesses our Vermont standards. And for ELA, it's the Common Core Standards, and it's our Next Gen Science Standards for science. And for math, it's also the Common Core Standards. And one thing that I wanted to emphasize is that the VTCAP is a single measure at the end of a grade or a grade band. And so it's a singular event, and we should always take that into account when we are looking at our results. And that all of your VTCAP scores should be analyzed along with the additional measures from your local comprehensive assessment systems. At the subject score, meaning ELA overall or math overall or science overall, the data, we look at the data within 4 buckets. There's a level 1, 2, 3, and 4. And for ELA, this slide describes basically what each of those levels mean. So you can start at 4, you can start at 1, but I'm just going to read 4 out loud. And what I've done is I have bolded the change in language because the language stays the same. So we go from a thorough understanding to satisfactory to partial understanding to emerging understanding of how to interpret and analyze texts, use language and its conventions, and write for a task and purpose. I also want you to know that in the bottom corner, that link is a live link and it'll take you to the document that we have gotten this information from. These are your math performance descriptors. And again, I bolded the differentiated language. So level 4 students show a thorough understanding. Level 3, a satisfactory understanding. Level 2, partial. Level 1, emerging in their ability to show emerging understanding or understanding of mathematical concepts. And students show a thorough understanding of mathematical concepts and strong procedural skill, fluency, and application to solve problems. I'm sorry. And for science, we have the same thing. You can see the same pattern here. And it's for all 3 dimensions. So this slide to explain from the subject level reporting, we start to narrow down into reporting categories. And what this slide is showing you is that while we have 4 levels of reporting for VTCAP overall subject level, we actually only have 3 levels of reporting within each of the reporting categories. So to give you an example, if ELA is the overall subject category, a reporting category within that is going to be informational text. And what this shows you under the category where there's only 3 buckets is that because we're dealing with fewer items, so if we have 60 items in the whole assessment, and let's say just for the informational text category, we only have 30 items, we have less information on which to base conclusions about where a student might be performing. So we couldn't take with 30 items in that category, psychometrically, it wasn't reliable to put that into 4 categories. There wasn't enough evidence within 4 categories, but if we take those same items and we divide them into 3, then we have enough evidence to make a reliable conclusion about where students are. So that's what I'm hoping that this slide shows you. Does anybody, let me know if you have any questions. Okay. This slide shows you the different reporting categories in math, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I am going to give you a second to look at it. For those of you that are not math teachers and are ELA teachers, the categories change from grade to grade, and that's different in ELA. Okay, and so 3 and 5 are grade band, 3 to 5 grade bands, 6 to 7 grade bands, and then grade 8 and grade 9. For ELA, it's very straightforward. 3 through 9, we have literary text, informational text, and writing analysis and language conventions. And then for science, we have practices and cross-cutting concepts in physical science in 5th, life science in 8th, earth and space science in 11th. So the next part of the session, we're going to look in math, in ELA, and then in science about how those VTCAP items might be similar and different in the language format and approach from the local instructional materials and assessments that we use. And then Marissa is going to step in and help us explore this question in math.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a grade 5 sample item from the VTCAP. We're going to be looking at grade 5 performance level descriptors so that we can see how the VTCAP has relates to what we're doing in our classrooms and what we can also do in our classrooms to help students be able to transfer their knowledge and skills onto the VTCAP. Linked here is an Achieve the Core document. If you've never heard of Achieve the Core, it is directly aligned with the Common Core. And what it does is it breaks down in each grade level the major supporting and additional clusters. This is linked. So when you get the slide deck, you are able to click this. It can bring you straight to the website for your grade level. And what this can really help with is identify, where students need to spend the majority of their time and what skills they need to master in order to be on this algebra track up through high school. It can help you determine where to spend the most of your time. We know as teachers in the classroom, time is very limited. So if you're having trouble figuring out, where students are struggling, how to get the most bang for your buck type situation, what skills can really help students sort of trickle out and filter into other areas. Next up, we have the performance level descriptors for 5th graders. And these are broken down into different levels as Karen has stated in all the slides, the bottom right-hand corner, that link is a live link that can bring you to the Vermont document. And this shows you a snapshot of what students need to be able to master by the end of 5th grade, and it can show you where they're at. These can be helpful to be used in your classroom to figure out where students are at the end of the school year. And of course, there's more in addition to this, but this is the 5th grader as a whole. Later, you'll be able to see where we can break down those performance level descriptors for individual domains of math.
Okay, so that was level 4.
And as you can see Karen going through the slides, you'll be able to sort of pick out some of the wording in the descriptions and really how it changes from asking students, more procedural type questions to actually being able to analyze, identify, asking students those more depth of knowledge, level 3 and 4 type questions.
So Marissa, are you saying that when you go up to level 4, the depth of knowledge, you're going to see more indicators that lean into the higher depth of knowledge? Is that
Yes.
okay?
Yeah, picking out some, if you've ever unpacked standards before, determining what students need to be able to know, understand, be able to do. When we pick out those verbs and adjectives that students need, you'll see that it does get more difficult as you get to the level 4. and the level 2 and 1 here. Like I was saying, as you can see, we're not asking students to analyze anything. So you can see that we're not asking them to do quite as, I don't want to say more difficult questions, and remembering that our goal is for students to be able to transfer the knowledge and skills that we teach them into new and novel situations, which is what the VTCAP is. So helping us help our students determine, when they get the VTCAP or any sort of, problem or task that you're doing, that they can use those knowledge and skills and show what they can do and understand. These are also the mathematical practices that the VTCAP gives us as well for the level 2, 3, and 4 student. It's important that we don't forget about the mathematical practices. We can find them also on the Common Core website to ensure that we're embedding this in our classrooms. We can always make sure that the tasks that we're doing are tied to a specific mathematical practice. We can also use them in a way that we can have students identify where they're at within these levels for, problem solving, quantitative reasoning, can help us again with those depth of knowledge level 3 and 4 type tasks that we really need students to be exposed to and to be able to practice. So reading through these descriptions, again, they're linked in the bottom right, can really help, especially when we're tying them to what we're doing in the classroom.
Marissa, do you advocate that folks take the practices and turn them into learning targets and I can statements explicitly for kids ever?
Yes, what I find to be helpful in the classroom is taking those mathematical practices and turning them into either I can statements, learning targets, student learning objectives, whatever you use. And when you're doing a task, to focus or sort of look for one of the mathematical practices that you really want to hone in on. For instance, that modeling. So there are things you can do in your classroom. There are tasks you can create that might have modeling as sort of the forefront of the mathematical practice that students are practicing in the class. And whenever you do a task or do an assessment, you always want to make learning visible to students. So if they know what learning target they're doing, why they're doing it, we can also add into that the mathematical practice. Why do they need to be good modelers when it comes to mathematics? So what this is here, this is a VTCAP sample item. We went through the practice assessments and we looked through all of the questions and we wanted to pull some out. We pulled out a few, but this one is the one that made the slide deck. If you want to take a minute, you can read the question. But the first thing we wanted to do, especially if you're thinking about how you can use questions like this in your classroom for students, is we wanted to identify the major cluster and then the standard that this type of question represents. So Karen, if you want to click, we can figure out exactly what that is. And this is a major cluster in 5th grade. And what we did is we wanted to figure out what depth of knowledge that this question asked. So when going through really determining, what students need to be able to show, is that we determined it was a level 3 type question, strategic thinking. There's a comparative analysis piece. This is a multi-step problem, and they do need to be able to explain and justify their answers within this problem here. What we want to make sure that we're doing in our classrooms is that we are giving students the opportunity to be able to be successful at a depth of knowledge level 3 question on the VTCAP or any sort of assessment that we're giving students or tasks that's outside of sort of what we're doing in our classroom. So we want to think about, if we were to give students a question like this, what mathematical vocabulary is needed for students to be able to understand this kind of question. A lot of times the vocabulary can get in the way of students showing what they know when we sort of reword something and put it in our words. What we usually say, that light bulb goes off to our students and they're like, oh yeah, I've heard it this way. So we want to make sure that we have the vocabulary needed for students to be able to access the questions that they're being given. So we went through and we thought about what vocabulary do students need to know to be able to answer a question like this. And some of that, what can help with that is figuring out those tier 1, 2, and 3 words. So you can go through that. But this is the list that we came up with that would be necessary for a student to be able to access this question. We also wanted to think about what mathematical demands get in the way of a student being able to access a question like this, so that we're able to expose students to, either the questions in our classroom, making sure that we're helping them transfer that knowledge that they're learning. So some of the mathematical demands, ensuring that we're allowing students to show that they can solve multi-step problems that builds off of a previous step. If we're only asking procedural problems or a one-step problem, we're not allowing students to be able to think deeper about the skills that we're teaching them. We need to create models so that students are able to represent a word problem. And that it's really key that whenever we can, that we're asking students to explain or justify their reasoning behind the math that they're doing. What you can't see here is all of the tools within the VTCAP that students need to be able to use to answer this sort of question. So doing a practice test is important, because even just showing them, how to use what's given, sometimes they have a calculator, whatever tool that the VTCAP provides, is important that students understand that. So it's not getting in the way of them being able to show what they know. Again, that makes sense of problems and persevere in solving them. That's part of that mathematical practice. That's building that perseverance. By being able to show and go through a 3-step problem and building off the previous question. We know that reading demands in math is a big one. We know that math is reading as well. So we need to make sure that students are able to understand that's part of the vocabulary as well. And then determining what information is either irrelevant to the problem, are our answers reasonable? Do we need to go back? So thinking about all of these demands, are we ensuring that we're exposing students to this in our classroom, in our everyday tasks?
Can I just jump in real quick, Marissa, with a question, just because you're talking around it a little bit. Someone asked if the VTCAP explicitly measures mathematical practice standards. I think what you're saying is maybe not explicitly, but it requires math practices. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, and if you do go back, or you don't have to go back in the slides, but the Vermont AOE and Cognia do give you that level 2, 3, 4 student aligned to the mathematical practices. And so although it might not be explicitly measured or reported out on, you're not going to get, a specific level for a student, except we do have, if you saw the domains that Karen had showed, the reporting categories, some of it is reflected in those as well, that modeling and problem solving.
In the category description, in the performance level descriptors, you mean?
Excuse me if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I believe it was in the reporting categories.
Okay.
But what I can do is I can double check that and
it's okay.
and
And the documentation where they provided level 2, 3, and 4 around the math practices, that is from Cognia. So clearly Cognia is emphasizing those practices in the VTCAP.
Yeah, and I did just look at your slide regarding the reporting categories.
Yeah.
So for all of the grade levels, we have problem solving, reasoning, and argument is a reporting category. And we know that those are those are part of the mathematical practices, and we have modeling patterns and structure as well as the reporting category. So they're more of combined in a way.
How we doing, George? Any other questions while we're here?
If we're going to move away from math, I should just ask a question about with Achieve the Core with 9th grade performance level descriptors. Someone's asking, saying they only really have them up to 8th, and it isn't broken down specifically, so it's unclear what's for 9th grade. I would say that's high school always gets this kind of gap, if you will.
Yeah, so the Achieve the Core, the major clusters, it's on an algebra track. So what they're showing is the major clusters that students need to be able to know and understand in order to be successful in algebra. So it does not give us, you know, those major clusters when we get to the high school levels.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
And George, someone had raised their hand earlier. I'm not sure whether.
We're all set, I think.
Okay, thanks.
And just to go back to the VTCAP reports for the mathematical practices, Danielle did let us know in the data file that the VTCAP reports on those mathematical practices for reporting categories in 4, 5, and 6.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle.
So what we just wanted to add here is another type of question that assesses the same standard within the same cluster, which is also a depth of knowledge level 3 question. It's asked in a different way. It's asking students, basically giving them an answer and determining, you know, what situation can represent this expression that you're showing students. So it's asking them a question in a different way. Again, exposing students to these questions and tasks that allow them to be able to transfer their skills, which essentially, I can say it a million times, is our goal for students, is to really be able to show what they know and can do. So here, it's linked as well, but if you go to the Achieve the Core, this is from Illustrative Math, again, a depth of knowledge level 3 type question that you can give to your students to use in your classrooms, just to expose them to different ways of how we can be asking questions to our students.
And so just doubling back, just to be clear, the algebra cluster is represented on the grade 9 VTCAP, right? And if so, is it for all the performance level descriptors for that category? It's being asked.
Marissa, you may have to go back to the slides. Let's, why don't we do this? Why don't you write in a response?
Okay. Once
I'm just trying to digest and comprehend the question.
Marissa will respond once Karen's presenting. She's trying to present
I think so.
which is a
Yeah.
tough thing. So
Is that okay? All right.
yeah, sounds
Great.
good.
And Marissa, this is just an NWEA sample, assessment sample, correct?
Yep, same type of example. I'm just showing how many different ways you can be asking students questions, building on their knowledge, and so forth.
And this is the same standard?
Same standard, same
Fine, okay.
cluster. Again, from Achieve the Core, they give you example tasks that you can use to help if you're not sure sort of where to pull from, or you only have your the program you're using in your classroom, you need more examples. That Achieve the Core gives you tasks that you can use. This is where we showed the performance level descriptors for the domains of math or the reporting categories. So you can use these to determine not only what does my 5th grader need to be able to do at the end of the school year as a whole, but then within each reporting category or domain as well.
Thanks.
And as Karen goes through, just thinking about, how we can use these to inform the level to which we teach, ensuring that we're not just teaching to a level 2, that we are exposing students to that level 3 and level 4. And then lastly, just the VTCAP does give you a quantile measure, which is an instructional tool that you can use to help in your classroom. And these quantile measures determine, or there's 2 quantile measures. One is given to your students to determine, what skills they're ready for. And then each mathematical skill is also given a quantile measure. So you can determine if that skill is in their quantile range. So what this quantile level does is it aligns tailored instructional materials to your students and where they're at. So it can help you in a number of ways. The Lexile Quantile Hub is free to Vermont educators, and you can put in the quantile range of your classroom. You can put in the quantile score for a student. It can help you pull tasks and activities that can help with students within their quantile measure.
And the link for that hub is at the end of this slide presentation.
Thanks.
And just, some of the other assessments that you might be giving also gives you a quantile measure as well. So that is linked onto the right here, the how does a student receive a quantile measure, and it has listed there of all the assessments that will give that to you. And this is just for reference, the end of the school year for spring, from grades K to 12, sort of where students are at within the 50th and 90th percentile of that school year. It is the math version of Lexile. Yeah, so that Lexile Quantile Hub. And then what level of concepts a student can interact with, that's exactly it. It's very fun to explore. There's a ton of tasks and activities given within their quantile range, prerequisite skills, impeding skills. So definitely take a look if you haven't been on to the Lexile Quantile Hub yet.
Thanks, Marissa.
Of course.
We're going to talk a little bit about reading, and we'll see. We might also talk about writing, and we might not, because I definitely want to leave enough time for science. So let's dive in. These are the overall performance descriptors for reading for the VTCAP, and you can look at them here. And this is a level 4 description. And I underlined above grade level because level 4 indicates that students are performing beyond grade level. And it's broken down into text complexity and demonstrated skills. There's a lot of text on the slides, and I know it's an hour-long webinar, and the best thing to do is when you get the slide deck to go through it on your own to read some of the text. Level 3 is represented, and you can get to the live link in the bottom right corner. Level 2 and level 1. So we're going to talk a little bit about listening and speaking because we've chosen an item. So these are the listening and speaking performance descriptors right here from level 4 and level 3. And level 2 and level 1. And the item that I chose is both listening and speaking and reading informational text. And those were the performance descriptors we were just talking about. I want to emphasize something, that one of the reasons that we chose this item is because very often listening and speaking is not a category that teachers directly instruct and assess in their classrooms. So I do want to emphasize that it is assessed on the VTCAP, and that any way that you can in the classroom, integrating through your collaborative learning groups or with intention around texts and auditory texts, that it's worth pursuing. listening and speaking, or the speaking and listening category. So this particular item addresses speaking and listening 3.3, ask and answer questions about information from a speaker, offering appropriate elaboration and detail, and then also key ideas and details, standard 1. And this item is a depth of knowledge 1. Okay, it's just basic recall of what a student has listened to, and it requires them to remember information from an auditory text. And we want to help students with navigating the audio between full text and excerpted text, and selecting play, sort of the manual aspects of taking the assessment, changing speed and volume, so to make sure that they can get their needs met as they're taking the assessment. Spoken versus written text in order to respond, recalling oral information, and the last one is keeping notes while listening. That's actually an incredibly difficult thing, especially, for third graders. So I would encourage you, if you're going to use a movie clip or some sort of auditory text, that you could explicitly in your classroom help students with graphic organizers or creating their own to take notes while they're listening. And the comprehension and collaboration standard or domain within listening and speaking, this speaks to the performance descriptors within that area of listening and speaking. So you can see level 2, level 3, and level 4. So if you're going to go ahead and plan instruction to build students' listening and speaking skills and assessment, then your learning targets are right there on level 3, and your learning goals are right there. And the same with key ideas and details. There's the level 2 and level 3 performance descriptors. That was the other cluster that was addressed in that item. And level 4. And I'm going to zoom into the writing. I'll move quickly through it. I don't think there's a lot of slides, but I do want to just talk about it for a moment. Here are the performance descriptors for writing. Level 4, level 3, 2, and level 1. And it's similar to what Marissa was saying earlier. The cognitive demand grows as you move from 1 to 4, and the depth of knowledge will also grow. So for this particular item, students are asked to read 2 or more passages, but in this case it's 2, and they're asked to read both passages and answer questions based on the passage. And this is a DOK, strategic thinking or reasoning level item. It asks students to write, and it's complex. They need to first navigate the passages, extract the important information, and then write a multi-paragraph response. The demands here are they have to navigate between the passages, reading texts, and then also taking notes and writing texts, right? They need to understand the directions and use the tools within the VTCAP experience and editing. The word passage, as in text, is a word that may or may not be familiar to them. So that's an important thing to directly instruct. And they have to navigate between the two. They have to navigate through support and supporting and the different forms of speech of the word of supporting evidence. They have to apply the skills of the craft to complete their writing, okay? Transition words, all of these different vocabulary, you know, the labels for some of these, like for instance, if they're using the language of transition words in the VTCAP, then you might think about, no matter what language you're using for those connecting words and sentences, you're going to want to make that connection for kids while you are instructing from whatever curriculum tool you're using. Okay. Focus, tone, voice, and purpose. I'm sure that those words are present in your curriculum materials. So I'm going to go through Lexile, and Marissa has really introduced this, so I don't have to go into great detail, but it's the Quantile Lexile Hub. So Lexiles are from the same place, it's Metametrics, and students receive a Lexile measure from the assessments for grades 3 through 8 on the VTCAP. And in the Lexile Quantile Hub, in the Lexile area, there are a lot of materials and resources. There are, and it says right here, dozens and dozens, 65 reading assessments and products that produce Lexile measures for you. And in Vermont, you've had this wonderful initiative that has supported school districts and SUs to purchase assessment tools that provide Lexile measurements. And a Lexile measure is basically the measure of text complexity that a student can manage and use, and it's the same as what Marissa was saying. A student can be assigned a Lexile score, which basically tells you an approximate level of reading, and it's oftentimes it's a range. And at the same time, you can apply a Lexile measure to a text that will tell you if a text is a 780 Lexile, it'll tell you that it's appropriate for students at a specific grade level or that are reading at that Lexile level or that received that. Okay. And you can see the range there. A Lexile measure is based on text complexity, complexity of sentences, their length, their structure, the vocabulary. And the demand, as you go up in the length of sentences and the more complex vocabulary, it asks students to hold more in their minds, in their working memory as they read, to make meaning. And the student measurement, it measures a student's global reading comprehension ability. It doesn't take into account prior knowledge, background knowledge. It just measures their global reading comprehension ability. Well, I'm going to go back to the slide because I'm not sure if I should, but I want to make sure to tell you that on the Lexile Hub, you can get dozens of books and resources that are aligned to specific Lexiles, and that's one really important way to use the Lexile Hub. And I want to emphasize here that the reason this is important is that students, it's the ZPT is the zone of proximal development. So we want to give students reading material that's within their zone of proximal development, and a Lexile range will allow you to do that. And in terms of gaining understanding of what text might be needed to access text and content, helping students to gain understanding of, and ourselves, the hub can be used to understand for us what scaffolding is needed with different texts. It can help us target instruction. You can, I want to show you, I'm going to go back for 1 second. You can put Lexiles in and get books. You can take text and copy it and paste it into the Lexile tool, and it'll tell you the approximate Lexile. So that's very important if you're doing a unit and you have a piece of text that you're hopefully using as core instruction with the whole class. You might see that the Lexile of that text is way beyond some of the capacity of some of your students. So you might want to make adjustments, maybe put it back into ChatGPT and ask them to reduce the Lexile of the text that you're using and so on. And to paralleling Marissa's slide, this just shows you in the spring where students in first grade might be, what their Lexile might be at the 50th percentile and what their Lexile might be at the 90th percentile. And I'm going to invite Catherine so George, if you could unmute Catherine.
Yep.
And she's going to speak to the element.
Catherine, would you like to be a panelist, or would you just like me to allow you to talk?
It looks like she's logging in as a panelist.
I don't have any idea.
Let me make you a panelist so you can see.
Perfect. Thank you.
There we go. You're all set.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, George. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be able to be here with you and to be able to have a little bit of some airtime in this arena for science. I think it's so important, and I absolutely understand the demands of literacy and math right now in this post-pandemic world, but I feel like science and social studies are subjects that we can bring the best of all the worlds into. So I'm so happy to be here. Okay. So I created a couple of slides using a grade 8 performance expectation from the Next Generation Science Standards, NGSS, and trying to follow a similar template of what Marissa and Karen have done with ELA and math. The Vermont CAP test has a wide array of items and tasks for students to move through as they take this test. This one in particular is from the major cluster of matter and its interactions, and is focusing on largely conservation of mass and chemical reaction outcomes. And so the major cluster and performance expectation are noted below the item. The depth of knowledge is a level 3 and involves a lot of strategic thinking, where the students have to develop, they're not developing this model, but they have to use and analyze this model in order to garner understanding of what's happening, what the question's asking. They have to explain their reasoning in terms of why they sorry, just lost my train of thought. In terms of how the chemical reaction is occurring and the outcomes of that, and then also do some comparisons between, and this is also pulling on other knowledge that is not inherent necessarily in this model that they need to bring to the table with them about atoms, molecules, and how they can interact or react to form new substances. Mighty Karen, thank you. So the science vocabulary needed list is on the slide here. And this list was just solely pulled from vocab that's used in this this Vermont CAP item. There's not a lot of wiggle room, I don't feel, in science for things to be interpreted differently or defined differently necessarily. I do think it's important you know, that students understand, for example, with models come in all shapes and sizes. They can be 2-dimensional, they can be 3-dimensional, it can be a drawing, it can be a 3-dimensional structure that they create. And so I think that a lot of students, when they see the word create a model or use a model, they automatically defer to things, you know, thinking about where they may have interacted with those and their own experience, like model airplanes. I don't know if kids still do model airplanes, but you know, and so I think it's really important to teach that a model, again, can come in so many different forms. The scientific demands of this task, and this is just for context, this task is one of 4 parts using the same model. So there's a lot of iteration, and there's the students have to have some stamina in having to sit with this model through 4 different questions, which I think is one of the challenging things about the Vermont CAP, and also in a good way. It really can dive deep into a subject or a topic for students to have to and show their understanding. The other demands in here, evaluating reasonable answers. The reading demands and being able to understand the context that they're being presented this information and how to make sense of the written narrative in conjunction with that model, which can be a really tricky piece for some students, and determine the relevant information to the questions that they're being asked to discern, and identify the limitations of the model. So, which again is a pretty high level thinking.
Hmm. It's interesting to me because I see a lot of overlaps with the math practices and the science content demands, or the demands of the content. It's actually pretty wonderful.
Yeah, it's great.
Pointed out in the chat as well. Yes.
Sorry, I just realized my camera was off too. I apologize for that. Talking to a black box, or
You're good.
listening to a black box. So, and thinking about, again, looking at the slides that Karen and Marissa presented, you all had laid out the level descriptors for, throughout math, some of the math and ELA tasks that were shown. For the science, because the science standards, the next generation science standards, deal in a three-dimensional format where they talk about content, science and engineering practices, and cross-cutting concepts. It's for 8th grade, it's 8 pages of level descriptors. And so I felt like that was too much to kind of pile into these slides. But Karen, is that a link that can be shared with this audience?
Sure.
Is it okay if I drop that? Just
Of course.
anybody is wondering.
Yeah, of course. Yep. And then George can grab it also.
Put
And
it in the chat. I'll put it on the last slide where we have additional resources.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're looking, in the meantime, while you're looking for that, can I ask a question that was brought up earlier about our science slide number 17? Whether or not the accuracy of that is where we say what's grade 5 is practices and cost-cutting concepts in physical sciences, 8 was life science, and 11 was earth and space. Someone was asking if those aren't all assessed at each grade level.
I am so happy that you asked that question. I think that they are all assessed at every grade level.
Okay. I just want to make sure, Catherine, and say it again if it's quite true. Because we took that from documentation, and so I think if that was, then we need to revisit that documentation. And if it's true, it's important. So all of them are assessed at all levels?
That's been my experience from the items that I've looked at.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's actually might be something we need to address in the documentation that was given to us. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And George, thank you for bringing that up. I noticed that when that slide was being presented too.
That's great.
So
glad.
And that's okay.
Well, thank you for articulating it orally. Okay. So in terms of the 3 dimensions of the next generation science standards, particular to this performance expectation, NGSS calls them performance expectations as opposed to standards. The disciplinary core ideas, which is the content that students are going to be grappling with in this item, is about chemical reactions. And then the science and engineering practice in this is developing and using models, and the cross-cutting concept is energy and matter. What's really important to note is that the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts, the NGSS typically aligns one of each of those with each performance expectation. There's so much room where other science and engineering practices or cross-cutting concepts are also addressed or can be addressed in teaching this, and also in the students and how they need to think about some of these items. So for example, in that science item that I highlighted, it's talking about how 1 carbon and 2 oxygen come together to form carbon dioxide, which has to do absolutely with energy and matter and the conservation of mass or conservation of matter. But it's also about structure and function. The students are needing to think about why carbon dioxide would have different properties than the two reactants that create it. So there's overlap for sure. And just again, to lift that up, that I feel it's really important that students are presented with these different perspectives and using different, in the science and engineering practices, they're all related. You most likely won't have a student, for example, plan and carry out an investigation without then having them analyze the data that they get from that investigation. And so there's, again, a lot of room to really teach, go deep into the content and the practices in science.
Thank
Great.
you,
Well,
Catherine.
You're welcome. I'm sorry, this isn't a slide, but just one more thing. So in terms of thinking about how to prepare students for the Vermont CAP in the science world, I strongly suggest, I'm not about teaching to a test. I strongly suggest, though, that educators take advantage of taking the sample test so that they get a sense of how these items and tasks are presented. And, you know, for example, in one of the items in this cluster, there's a small nuance about students need to understand atom versus molecule in order to choose the correct answer of a question. And so it would just, I think, really highlight things that educators can focus on, and in terms of how to get students to think about content and practices. And I've got a couple other links. The other thing that I would highly recommend, if science educators out there haven't looked at the appendices, I've got it in book form for the Next Generation Science Standards, but I can also drop a link to that. The appendices are invaluable, and they go through in great detail and provide some awesome resources in terms of teaching to help tease out the content, science and engineering practices, and cross-cutting concepts. And then there are other websites, I don't want to keep going on and on, but there are other websites, Wonders of Science, and other on Vermont AOE's website. There's an Appendix B, which is our local comprehensive assessment systems site, and specific to science, you can find some resources there to engage kids in thinking about this three-dimensional learning in science. I'm all set. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, but send George all of the links. You can put them in the chat. And
Perfect. I'll
put
keep
anything that
dropping.
you need in the slide deck. Okay. I want to give the last couple of minutes just for people to write in or raise their hands about any more questions, or write in suggestions about what else you would like to learn about related to the VTCAP and how that VTCAP relates to or can connect to your local assessment and instruction. So take a moment there. Anyway, take care, everybody. And thanks for coming today.
Thanks for joining. Take
Okay.
care.
Thanks, everyone.